Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast, where we help leaders build strong teams. Teams built on empathy, understanding, and trust, where every team member feels valued and contributes at the highest level possible.
Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast. My name is Steve Neesmith.
And I'm Rodney Cox.
And Rodney, our guest today is Dan Reiland. Dan currently serves as the Executive Director of Leadership Expansion for 12Stone Church in Lawrenceville, Georgia, where he served as 20 years as the Executive Pastor. Dan is also a leadership coach, a consultant, author, teacher, husband, father, and most importantly, a grandfather. Dan, thank you for joining us today on the StrongTeams.com podcast.
Thank you for the invite, Rodney, Steve. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and it's good to be here.
Yeah, Dan, let me add my welcome too. And, for the listeners that are unfamiliar with 12Stone Church, I think it'd be really, really interesting for us to start our time together with you just giving a brief overview of what's 12Stone.
Sure. Well, Kevin Myers is a founding pastor and is still here. They came down from Michigan. He and Marcia came down from Michigan in 1987. So what is that, 36 years? Mm-hmm. So unusual, but a blessing to have, a 35-year pastor here. And beginning in 87, as I mentioned, slow beginnings. They really dug it out. Took 7 years to get to 200 people. But God has been kind and things have really moved forward. In 2007, we became multi-site. Today we have 8 campuses around the greater Atlanta area. Wow. And we're planting churches. We have a residency with 30 college graduates preparing for ministry with us for 2 years, each. And so good things are happening and God's blessing.
Okay, tell us a little bit more about your background. How'd you get started in ministry and what led you to 12Stone?
Sure. Well, there's a story there on the leading to 12Stone, but I don't know if we should take 2 or 3 minutes for a story. But the quick version of just the mechanics. I'm a SoCal guy, born and raised in San Diego, and interestingly, my undergraduate work was in criminal justice administration, and I was a private investigator for a short time before God called me to ministry, and just a great story there. Just God kind of said, you're doing this. I don't want you, with the power of life and death. That's a bit over dramatized in a camera. I want you doing this. And so there was quite a change from criminal, justice to where I am now. Although I do say sometimes, kind of joking, I never had a clue how much understanding the criminal mind would help in the church. But that's another story. Yeah. But you seem to be okay with a quick story. How did I come to 12Stone? I've only started telling this story recently because, I don't know, it feels like it's focused on me, but I really realized that it's a God story and it's really points to God, so I'm having fun telling it. So, in between the church in San Diego and the church here, I was with John. John and I left San Diego together with 25 families, and we came out here. And so for a few years, there was 3 years between San Diego and this church here at 12Stone. And so those were the years. Remember Enjoy, the cassette tapes all around the country? Remember all that? Yeah. So we did that. We were in churches all over the country and enjoying ministry. But God began to pull within me to return to the local church. I love the church. I love being a pastor. And I was in churches every week, but there's a difference between that and being in one. And so I thought, well, I'm going to be a senior pastor. I'm not going to be an exec pastor, again. And so John and I would walk and talk and he said, you can't leave. We're partners together. And we're still very close. We talk and text all the time. But I said, I think I need to. And so we're having this long conversation over the course of a year. And then I got one of those 2 a.m., 3 a.m., I don't remember, prayer moments, when you're awakened in the middle of the night and I went down the hall and I remember distinctly, and I'm not given to drama. I'm not a real, this doesn't happen a lot, but it was clear And I went in there, and the room just, I don't want to be weird theologically, but the room just sort of lit, the Holy Spirit, the movement of God. And he spoke so clearly, and he said, you will be an exec pastor. You'll be Kevin Meyer's exec pastor. You'll sell your home, and it won't be convenient. And that was it. It was over. And I thought, I've preached for Kevin a couple of times. I've consulted for a couple of times. That, so, when you wake up in the morning, though, after something like that, you go, right. So I called John, and I said, John, I think God just told me I'm supposed to go be Kevin Meyer's exec pastor. And he goes, typical Maxwell 5, he goes, Margaret, Dano's going to be Kevin's exec pastor. He goes, and he goes, Dan, I'll call him. And I'm going, no, don't, and he hung up, and he just called him. And I go, you can't control John, and so he called, and the way they tell the story is Kevin had to pull over because he had been praying for an executive pastor for 2 years. It's all in his journal. It's amazing. And for 2 years, it's even written in it, said, God, I'm asking for somebody like Reiland, but Maxwell will never let him go. So could you give me someone like him? And so he's like, oh my gosh. And then in January of that year, January of 2001, God spoke to him again and said, stop looking, stop praying. I've set him aside for you. I'll give him to you when I'm ready. Well, that moment of prayer for me was June of that year. And so it was just, it was a God thing. It was clear. I was on staff within 2 months, and I've been here for 21 years since.
Wow, what an amazing, God, his ways are so different than our ways, right? And it's so difficult just to listen. Now, I know that recently you transitioned from executive pastor into the executive director of leadership expansion at 12Stone. So help us understand a little bit about what that role looks like and what the transition is and how they maybe differ.
Now, we're in a triple succession. And so that's a whole thing, but it's going extremely well. The senior pastor, myself, exec pastor, and our CFO, we have been developing and raising up the 3 millennials, the young ones. But now, millennials are 38, 39, and 40 now. So they're not that young, but we've poured into these 3 brilliant young leaders. And step by step, they're stepping into the role. Our CFO has already completed the transition. Kevin and I've actually transitioned out of my role, but both Kevin and Kevin will transition out of senior pastor formally in August. But the board has asked Kevin and I to remain on for a couple of years or so, but for coaching, mentoring, that kind of thing. So rather than the XP of the day-to-day, hiring, firing, all that kind of stuff on staff, culture, leading, developing, I'm coaching the young Dan, we call him. He's Dan Vanderwall. He's brilliant and doing a great job. And so my role for a couple of years or so is executive director of leadership expansion. So I'm spending all my time into 3 areas. One is coaching, mentoring, teaching staff. Second is our residency. I mentioned briefly a minute ago, where we have 25 to 30 college graduates, ministry majors, who are with us for 2 years, and we're preparing them for ministry, and they get hired in great churches across the country. And the third is church planting. So it's really all in the development of young leaders, and not all young leaders coming up. So that's my role now, and I'm absolutely loving it.
Well, I'm so glad we caught you at this time, just after your transition into the executive director of leadership expansion, because as you described, why that role is in place and what you're doing now, that's really what Ministry Insights is all about, and developing leaders around you. And it's just actually really exciting to hear about what's going on at 12Stone. Sounds like 12Stone, just because of the sheer size and tenure, how long it's been in the area, that you guys have your hands in everything these days. So you're seeing a lot. And you've probably seen a lot change, especially over the last few years with the pandemic. What are some trends you're seeing these days in ministry, Dan? The staff structures are changing. People are having to come up with new church models. Just what are you all seeing these days that's trending, or where are you guys going in the future?
Yeah. A couple of challenging things, and then a couple of encouraging things, and then maybe some of those what's the future kind of a thing. But I think on the challenging side, I think culture, what church leaders are dealing with, probably paramount all the time, every day, is that culture is rapidly changing, far more than ever before, and the divisive nature makes ministry more complicated than ever before. It just has, even just 5 years ago, it's quite changed. Maybe on a little bit more day-to-day level, on a challenge side, volunteerism is surprisingly been hit hard. And even the best of churches, great recruiters and developers and encouragers and the volunteer realm of the local church, which is the backbone of the church, obviously, it's the body of Christ, that's a challenge. And so leaders everywhere are pouring into that and figuring out new ways and healthy ways to do that. We don't want a small number of volunteers burnt out, maybe a couple things on the encouraging side. I think people are, even in the past 2 or 3 months, are attending church more. Almost everywhere we talk and everywhere we go and all the churches we talk to, attendance is on the rise. People are coming to church more. They're seeking more. There is a heightened interest in spiritual values. And that's encouraging. We're all very encouraged about that. It's been a long time since that trend has been seen. Strategic direction, what's in the future, what's happening. I don't know if this is futuristic. I don't think that's but it's future in terms of today future. It's the now going forward, where multi-site, it was questioned a lot in the COVID era there. Post-COVID, though, the multi-site is still strong. It just has a couple of new twists added to it that churches are exploring and endeavoring. One is a heavy emphasis in including mergers in the process, where so many boomers are retiring and so many church buildings are, maybe there's a smaller aging congregation, but it's a wonderful building. So the churches with a little bit more vibrant, maybe a younger crowd and they're merging with the buildings and helping to expand the campusing. It's one of the best stewardship models I've seen in a long time to actually come together and help each other. And then the one that's not brand new, but it's certainly engaging and certainly continuing in the future, the look of the church, the approach of the church, the vibe of the church in general is not as attractional, as it has been, moving away from that era, which was wonderful. Thousands, tens, hundreds, millions of people came to Christ, but probably a little less show, a little bit more discipleship is in play. And someone who's been around as long as I have, from the Jurassic era, it's all cyclical. And so it's all part of the movement of God. And so we always are thankful for the movement before us and look forward to see what God's going to do after us. But that's what we're seeing now.
Dan, you may have answered my next question with your answer there, but in your experience of the challenges that you see today in the in ministry, what can you identify one or two of the single biggest challenges that ministry leaders are facing today?
Sure, Steve. I will go back to a place I was and kind of tap into culture and then maybe run from there, just not run from it, run there for a minute. I think when it's difficult to discern culture, meaning who culture is becoming, and because it's so multifaceted and it becomes difficult. When it's difficult to discern culture and where it's headed, it's difficult to see around the corner. You know that phrase. What's our leaders' job is to see around the corner.
That's good.
And when ministry becomes, when it's difficult to do that, ministry becomes reactionary rather than visionary. And that's a massive change when you're playing catch up and you're wondering and you're not sure. And sometimes that can even lead to second guessing and vision almost takes a back seat, which of course is, death to momentum. And I know that no one was ever able to predict the future, but there were a lot of things that were predictable. and they aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens now, if you take all that I just shared with you for a minute there and go inward to the heart and the soul of a leader, that has increased what I call it like a gut level, a low grade anxiousness, even to some levels of anxiety in leaders that really hasn't been present in the past.
Interesting.
And so that whole movement is going on, and which brings us to a lot of other ways that we try to do soul care for leaders. But it's a complex season. It's a good season, but it's complex.
Yeah, what a great segue into our next question. It's like, so with that in mind, what advice would you give young leaders, the rising leaders?
I think learning, and I'm going to say something that we know, but it isn't just a head nod. It's because, we might know healthy rhythms. We might say, yeah, I know all that. Just because it isn't a new thought, it becomes new in a new era.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes just like we know how to love and care for volunteers and develop and train and equip and recruit volunteers and invite them on the team, but it's different now. It's really different now. And the same thing in terms of healthy rhythms. It's different now. Just technology, I call it time compression. Technology has been around for a long time, but time compression is to the point now where we have, counselors specializing in addictions to phones. I mean, it's different. Yeah. And so healthy rhythms, sorry, Rodney, a long meandering road to get to start to answer. I think to young leaders, learn healthy rhythms of work and margin. Margin's key. Learn healthy rhythms to work and margin, and home and office. The two words that I speak to are pace and pressure. Mm-hmm. That's really what causes leaders to tap out. When the larger the organization gets, the larger the church gets, the higher the responsibilities go, and so the greater the pressure. Mm-hmm. And when you're starting to deal with, because it's all inside, when you start to deal with increased speed, pressure, and a little bit of maybe a little increased anxiousness, and lowered margin or higher pressure, that's a complex thing. If you don't slow down, find margin, and you don't find margin on the back end.
Right.
Lots of times, I'm going to work and I'm going to work. And when I get this thing done, I'll go get some rest. That's not margin. Margin is always on the front end. You've got to put it in your schedule and find it in your schedule and find room to breathe and to pray and to enjoy family. So fighting for margin is important in dealing with the things that we're talking about right now.
That's a great point. Rodney and I have talked about that so much, and establishing those boundaries as a leader. More importantly, because when you establish those boundaries, you're also modeling that for your teams. And
exactly.
Those of us, I'm in my 50s. Those of us on this podcast today can remember the days before we had texting and smartphones, and it was a little easier to guard some of those boundaries. The younger generation of leaders is growing up with smartphones, and they're expected to sort of be on this leash, or they think anyway they're supposed to be on this leash 24/7, but that's just not healthy. It's not sustainable.
Not healthy. It's not sustainable. And I'd add one more thing, if I may, for young leaders in particular. All of our graduating residents that head out, or a young leader that we've developed for a while, we always tell them, when you find a church, get in the right environment. Put the right environment is far more a priority than the perfect job. Mm-hmm. That's just always get in the right one where they want the healthy. Of course, you work hard. You've got to, but they want the healthy environment. They want that balance and all of that. The second thing I would say, beside, put environment over the perfect job. You'll get your perfect job in time. And the second thing would be build and enjoy the job you were chosen for. Build and enjoy the thing somebody picked you for. Don't get frustrated so quickly that you aren't in the perfect job, or after you've been there for 4 weeks, you didn't get promoted. Just lean in, build what you've been selected for. But then I always add, enjoy the work. Mm-hmm. I see young leaders sometimes frustrated because it's not the perfect job and they didn't get promoted, and they're kind of frustrated. They want to get to another thing, and they miss the joy of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And so build it, enjoy it. And if you're that kind of leader who builds what you've been given and you're enjoying the journey, you will get noticed and you will get to the place you want to get to.
Mm. It's like I have this one thing against you. You've left your first love, right? And it's like helping a leader to hearken back to that call, that hearken back to that role in which they said, yes, I'll do that. And then the joy that they experienced early on, and now maybe the things that are robbing them of that joy, and say, I'm going to put these things off and I'm going to lean into these things in order to help them, like you said, gain the margin and boundaries that they need. I've found myself in my temperament, it's almost impossible when my phone dings or when it rings not to answer it, no matter what the circumstance. So I started putting my phone on automatic do not disturb at 7:00 in the evening, right? And there's only a handful of overrides, emergency overrides that can get through that. And, I've found that to be able to give me more focal time with my wife in the evening and giving her the margin that she needs and giving me the rest that I need, because I tend to go 24/7 and don't need quite the downtime other people do. But I do need that downtime, and I do need that rest as well. I think that's incredible wisdom given to our listeners here today. Leading a church of the size of 12Stone, obviously you guys have been building strong teams and large teams for a while. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you guys do strategically to build and maintain strong teams.
Well, that's an itty-bitty question.
Give us the gold nuggets.
That's why we invite
the gold nuggets.
That's why we invite
How
the
do we
Dan Reilands onto our podcast to tackle
This
hard
is it.
questions.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, let me give you 5 words. I'll go macro and then we'll just take a little slice or two and you guys say stop when it's time to stop. But this is where I've lived my life and I love this arena. But I think a way to look at the question that you're mentioning in terms of, for our listeners and leaders in the church, there's 5 words that I've approached this with in terms of staffing, which is really the core of what we're getting at in terms of teamwork and all that, is culture, selection, development, teamwork, and performance. Mm-hmm. So obviously culture, the famous quote, eat strategy for breakfast, and then selection, who you pick for your team, is everything. Mm-hmm. Development, pouring into them. We call it the 2X factor, pouring twice as much in as you expect back out and wanting more for them than from them. Mm-hmm. Teamwork, oh my gosh, we could spend so much time there, but it's like culture. You have to, you can have a great team and a great culture, but you have to work at it. And we have to work at it it's like a good family. You have to work at it. Mm-hmm. And then performance is the one that's always amazed me or surprised me in the local church. We don't like to talk about performance. We don't like to talk about outcomes. That doesn't sound spiritual and all. And then when I get to coach leaders, I say, well, here's the thing. We don't like to talk about that. We don't want the reviews and did you hit the goals and all those kind of things. However, you'll fire somebody if you don't. Mm-hmm. So why don't we talk about it? Why don't we talk about development and outcomes and expectations? And let me talk about expectations for a second and take us back up to culture for maybe a minute, and that'll probably all we have for it. But expectations in the midst of this in large teams is a great thing to think about. It's a great, for just having a snippet of time, it's a great takeaway. Because expectations, as we all know, either produce delight or disappointment. Mm-hmm. Period. Whether it's in a marriage or with your children, expectations always produce either delight or disappointment. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have to talk about delight. We all know that's wonderful. So let's talk about disappointment for a minute. Prolonged disappointment. I didn't get the job. I didn't get the promotion. I didn't get this. I didn't get an office. Prolonged disappointment turns to discouragement. Mm-hmm. And prolonged discouragement turns to frustration. And prolonged frustration turns to anger. Mm-hmm. And so often when we're dealing with a staff member or a church member, they're highly frustrated or highly angry. We thought, how did that happen? Well, that didn't just happen. It started with prolonged disappointment. Now, when I say disappointment, I don't mean you got a lousy meal in a restaurant. Right. Get over it. Go to another restaurant. I'm talking about no, I'm disappointed. I thought this would happen and it didn't. And when that turns to discouragement, which I believe is probably one of the number one tools of the enemy, schemes of the enemy to take leaders out, those two things alone. So here's the takeaway. Try to catch things early in the disappointment, discouragement zone. Pay attention, watch the team, look what's going on around you, catch it there before it gets to, why are they so frustrated, or why is that person angry? Because it didn't start there. And I'll stop there, but if you want to go up and talk about culture, just one of those 5 things for a minute, we can, but let me stop there.
No, I think that's excellent insights. I think about hope deferred makes the heart sick. And it's like we have these hopes and dreams, and we think everybody understands them around us, but they don't. We don't have a way to communicate them, talk about them, and have open, transparent conversations. And it's in that place of open, transparent conversations that we build a culture that is full of empathy and understanding and trust. And those are the 3 pillars that we ascribe to the great recipe for a strong team. If we can't empathize with someone, the ability to see through their lens in some way, the ability to understand what their hopes and dreams and aspirations are, understand their motives, why they do what they do, then there's no trust, and we're always hiding from each other. And I don't think that you can hide and be healed. I don't think you can hide and be productive. I think that it's only when we walk in the light as He's in the light that we have the fellowship that we need to lead, become a strong team and lead God's people.
Rodney and Dan's last comment just was so relevant and so timely right now, because, we talk about the pandemic in past tense now, but organizations, faith-based organizations and secular organizations are still reeling from it. They're still trying to pivot to land in the right place. And what that equates to is a whole lot of change. And when you're going through change doesn't happen over a couple of months. It usually happens over a couple of years or more. And what you have is you can have a lot of miscommunications about expectations. And so I appreciate, Dan, that last comment that you made. I think it's very valuable for our listeners, especially those leaders and aspiring leaders, to make sure that they are managing expectations effectively all the time, especially in this season of life and this season of ministry.
Dan, we're even seeing that the relational capital, we think that post-pandemic, everybody just comes back together and we leave off right where we start back up right where we left off, and taking the time to build some relational capital again is so important. Could you speak to that just for a moment, the power of building relational capital and building a strong team and strong culture?
Absolutely. That's both of you, such smart points. We assume, like you mentioned, it's all going to be the same, but we forget in the big picture, culture's changed, the world's changed. And what that means is we've changed. And so we come back in with fears or insecurities or hopes and dreams or something new. And if we don't take that time to recalibrate, reconnect, have conversations, check in, we can just have miscues and miscommunications. And people, church leaders work so hard to, greet a new guest, engage a new guest, make a new guest, next steps and all that. All of a sudden, the new guest is gone.
Right.
Because they assumed what we did in the past works in the present, and it doesn't. And I think you're dead on. It's that recalibration, recommunication, check in, have the honest conversations. We call it go the last 10%. That makes all the difference in the world.
Leaders don't become leaders overnight, and most leaders have great mentors, and I'm sure that you've had a few along the way, Dan. So tell our listeners maybe what are some of the mentors that you have in your life? or fellow leaders that have given you some just amazing advice along the way? And what maybe has the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Wow. Well, because I'm definitely the problem child, I've had a lot of advice over the years. And I've been very fortunate to have some extraordinary mentors and still do. And of course, perhaps leading the pack would be John Maxwell. And I remember as a young leader, there's another story I don't know that we have time for, so I'll just jump ahead to the thing I learned. Besides sometimes these embarrassing learning stories, like, really, tell that again, but anyway, that here it is, and you'll recognize it, but I think I may have been one of the first persons that he ever said it to, but way before it was in a book, is people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. And John was very gracious in a particular moment. I'll do a kind of a condensed thing here where he just had to sit me down and say, Dan, here's something I know about you. He said, I can tell you have a great love and a deep passion for people, but you're just not any good at communicating it. You're just running around here trying to save the world for Christ and get your job done. You got to slow down. He just spent some time with me, coaching me through things like that honestly, I would not be on this podcast with you today if it wasn't for a leader like John caring enough to slow down himself, take a minute, call me in his office, talk to me, coach me, and say, I see something in you, but you need to learn how to get it out so other people see it. That was probably one of the earliest life-changing moments for me that came from a mentor. Yeah.
It's like you got to learn how to purposely waste time with people sometimes, right?
There you go. That's it.
I mean, it can't just all be about the task, and it can't just all be about performance, right?
It can't. It's not. It's not at all.
And if we're not careful, what happens is we want to be in relationship, but we don't think we have time for it. Well, we have to have time for it. And so learning how to purposefully hang out with people with no agenda is so difficult for many leaders. But I think it will serve them well over time if they'll figure out how to do that and to do that well.
Yes, sir.
So leadership books, other podcasts that you might recommend to our rising leaders here.
I'm probably going to name on the podcast the ones that we all listen to, and the reason, Carrie Newhoff, Andy Stanley, Craig Groeschel, these podcasts are the ones I name because they talk to so many interesting people as well. So I do recommend those. In terms of books, I always smile when that question comes up because I love books. I find I'm inspired by the thoughts in books. I'm grateful for the person that spent 400 hours in that book, and so I actually cherish it while I'm looking for the gold. And so I just jotted down a few, but it's difficult to do that because there's, dozens and dozens. But and I try to pick ones that are practical, that are in place. For example, 8 Paradoxes of Leadership by Tim Elmore. I just took our campus pastors through that for many, many months. And I'm now taking them through a book I really love. It's not brand new, but Canoeing the Mountains.
Oh, I love that
Tim
book.
Bollinger. That's a great book. I'm taking the guys through that right now, which is wonderful. A book I am personally devouring. I just love it. It's on the spiritual life side. I typically only have time to read either leadership or spiritual life books. There's just not enough other margin for me. But I'm reading. I'm loving Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools by Tyler Stanton. Oh my gosh, is that a great book? It starts off, it looks like, is he talking to young Christians? He gets everybody, but Praying Like Monks and Living Like Fools is great. Of course, I've got to say, and truly mean this, anything by Maxwell. Another book, 2 more I would recommend, highly, highly recommend, Essentialism by Greg McEwen. Brilliant book. And one more, by another mentor of mine, Sam Chand, Bigger, Faster Leadership. It's a brilliant historical work from the Suez to the Panama Canal and the government and all the kind of extraordinary leadership and complexities that it took. And then it extracts from that narrative leadership principles. Oh, it's a good book. So there's enough to keep the readers busy for a while.
So, Dan, I like to ask this question to close our time together. And it's, what is that one question you wished I would have asked you that I didn't ask you?
That's a really good question. Other than why, what about my addiction to chocolate chip cookies? We'll set that one aside. What's up with that? Yeah. I'll be more serious and just say, after I've been a pastor now for 41 years. And I think an interesting question would be this: after 41 years in ministry, is it still worth it?
And how would you answer that?
Absolutely. I have no intentions of retiring. I might like to work a few less hours, but I think this is the greatest era of ministry ever, because we have grace and we have need and equal grace to innovate, experiment, try it, fail, do something again, because none of us know what we're doing anymore. Well, that's not true. We don't know what to do. That doesn't mean we don't know what we're doing, but it's all new. And we're all learning a new thing. So there's just tremendous amounts of invitation, opportunity, and need to do things new and fresh. And we need to, and it's okay if it doesn't work right the first time, try something else.
Before Rodney closes us out here, I know that you're also a coach to pastors far and wide. Where can our listeners find you online?
Sure.
DanReiland.com, simple enough. Blog site, it's got, not blog site, website, but it's got lots and lots and lots, hundreds. I don't want to tell you it's so many, but so many articles there for you, and resources and connections and things. So danreiland.com, the books are there and all. And if anybody wants to take a look, it's there for you.
So, Dan, we're so incredibly grateful for you spending time with us today. We know you're busy, and I guarantee our listeners will glean a lot from what you've had to say today and your experience. And once again, you can find Dan at danreiland.com. And Dan, thank you again for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you to both of you, Rodney and Steve. And maybe we can do this again.
Yes. Well, until we meet again, God bless.